Some memories never really fade. Even when you push them into the darkest corners of your mind, they wake you up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. This story is exactly one of those memories. Maybe writing it down will give me some kind of release, or whatever. Who knows? I started at a boarding school in the suburbs when I was in 8th grade. I stayed there through most of high school. It was in northern Connecticut, surrounded by woods. One of those classic New England boarding school atmospheres, stone walls, creaking wooden floors, and you could feel the weight of history in every corner. From day one, I shared a room with this kid named Weston. Honestly, none of us chose each other at first. The administration randomly paired us, just like everyone else. The room was incredibly small, 2 beds, 2 desks, and a tiny shared closet. The walls were painted that pale greenish-white color, you know, the kind that reminds you of hospital corridors. There was only one window, and it looked out toward the woods at the back of campus. The first few weeks were pretty normal. Weston was a quiet kid, but nobody found that weird. At boarding schools, most kids are withdrawn while trying to adjust to the new environment. We'd wake up, go to class, afternoon sports activities, study time after dinner, then go to bed. It was all routine. But by the end of the 3rd week, I started noticing strange things. It was a Thursday afternoon. I'd come back from soccer practice, taken off my sweaty uniform, and grabbed my towel to shower when Weston approached me. He had a folded piece of paper in his hand. Without saying anything, as if this were completely normal, he handed me the paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Things you're not allowed to bring into the room," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. I unfolded the paper. At first, I thought this was some kind of joke. But when I looked at Weston's face, there was no smile or playful look. On the contrary, he was looking at me so seriously, as if this paper was vitally important. The list was strange. It went like this. Items not to be brought into the room. Frogs, any species, salt, salt shaker, packaged salt, etc. Clover, 4-leaf or 3-leaf, iron nail silver jewelry lavender, dried or fresh, mirrors, except pocket mirrors, red candles. The list went on like this. There were 23 items total, and most were completely absurd. Frogs? I said. Why would I bring frogs? Just don't, Weston said. If you follow the rules, everything will be fine. But most of these don't make sense. Salt? Really? Do you have a salt allergy? No, he said. He paused. But salt breaks boundaries. What boundaries? He didn't answer. He just pointed at the paper and said, "Please read it and try to comply. It'll be better for both of us." Then he turned and went to his desk, as if he hadn't just handed me a spell list from Hogwarts. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Weston's weird list. Maybe he was just a very cautious kid. Maybe he had some strange superstitions. He'd said he was from Vermont, maybe people there were like that. Who knows? But in the following days, I started noticing more things about Weston. First of all, he was very picky about food. When we went down to the cafeteria, he could stand there for hours choosing what to put on his plate. He wasn't just picky, he was paranoid. Once, when the serving lady was putting mashed potatoes on his plate, she accidentally touched them with the sausage. Weston took a deep breath, as if a great injustice had been done to him, and threw the entire plate away. Into the trash, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's why I can't trust anyone," he muttered. The teachers had noticed he was weird too. In biology class, on the day we were going to do frog dissection, Weston went up to the teacher and said, "I can't do this." Mr. Henderson was an old and patient man. Can you tell me why you can't, Weston? Because they're special, Weston said. His voice was trembling. The frogs were killed for scientific research. No. Weston yelled so loud that everyone in class jumped. You can't harm them. They're messengers. The class went completely silent. Mr. Henderson took Weston out into the hallway and excused him from class that day. I dissected my frog, but the whole time, Weston's words, "they're messengers," kept spinning in my head. Messengers? Messengers of what? After the 4th week, I started noticing Weston's nighttime habits. The first time I heard it, it was around 2 a.m. The lights were off and there was only faint light filtering into the room from the street lamp. While I was half asleep, I heard Weston's voice. He was muttering. At first I thought I was dreaming, but when I opened my eyes, the sounds continued. Low, fast, almost like a whisper. He was sitting up in his bed, facing the wall, and his lips were moving. I couldn't understand what he was saying. Occasionally I heard familiar words, "No, please, don't come," but there were also words in another language mixed in. Maybe Latin. Or a completely made-up language, I don't know. I listened for about a minute, then shifted in my bed. He immediately went silent. He closed his eyes, turned his back, and went to sleep as if nothing had happened. Or pretended to sleep. This happened several more nights. Each time it was the same thing. After midnight, Weston would sit up in his bed and whisper toward the wall. Once he got up and walked to the window. He leaned against the glass, stared out at the woods for a long time. Then he turned back and lay down as if nothing had happened. At one point I wanted to tell him about it, but how would I explain? "Hey, you talk at night and it's really creepy." If I said that, he'd probably think I was weird. But worse was coming. In the middle of the 5th week, my curiosity got the better of me. Remember that little notebook of Weston's? He always kept it under his bed, inside the mattress. He never showed it to anyone, even when reading it he'd cover it with his hand. One day, Weston had gone to his afternoon music class. There was a mandatory instrument class at school, and he played piano. I knew he wouldn't be in the room for at least an hour. I locked the door. I went to his bed and felt under the mattress with my hand. After a few seconds, my fingertips touched something hard. I pulled out the notebook. It was small, bound in black leather. There was no writing on the cover. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The first few pages were blank. But then, the pages were filled with names. Just names. A long list. And many of them were crossed out. I started from the beginning of the list. Michael Thompson, Sarah Chin, David Rodriguez, Emma Patterson, Christopher Walsh, Weston Aldrich. This was his own name. Rebecca Martinez. I read page after page. I recognized most of the names. These were people from school, some students, some teachers, even a few administrative staff. Then I saw my own name. It was on one of the last pages, not crossed out. Tyler Morrison, me, Jennifer Hayes, Brandon Cole. My heart started racing. What did this mean? Why was my name on this list? Why were some names crossed out and others not? I flipped through the pages again, hoping to find a note or explanation, but there was nothing. Just names. No dates, no numbers, no explanations. My hands were shaking badly as I put the notebook back. I had a sick feeling inside, like I'd discovered a huge secret but couldn't understand what it was. After that night, I started watching Weston. Really watching. And I realized he was watching me too. But he wasn't just looking, he was studying me. In the cafeteria, in the hallways, even in the room. He'd glance from the corner of his eye. And worst of all, He was smiling. Very faintly, almost imperceptibly. But it was there. As if he knew something. A week later, one of the names that had been crossed out on the list disappeared. Michael Thompson was an upperclassman. He played basketball and was one of those types everyone liked. One Tuesday morning he didn't come to school. In the afternoon, the principal made an announcement. Michael's family had withdrawn him from school and he was transferring to another school. Everyone was shocked. Without any warning. Without any goodbyes. But the weird part was this: Michael's closest friends said he hadn't mentioned any transfer. In fact, Michael's family lived in Massachusetts and he loved his school there. Why would he suddenly leave? That night, Weston took out his notebook. He sat at his desk, opened a page, and crossed something out. I couldn't see exactly, but I knew. It was Michael Thompson's name. A chill ran through me. Over the next few days, I started researching the other crossed-out names on the list. Sarah Chen. She'd gotten suddenly ill last year and dropped out of school. David Rodriguez. He'd transferred. Christopher Walsh. He'd had an accident and spent a long time in the hospital. What did all these people have in common? They'd all disappeared. Either they'd left school, gotten sick, or something else had happened. And now was my name next to be crossed out. In panic, I started spending more time in my friends' rooms. I had two friends named Dylan and Brandon, and we'd spend hours playing video games in their room. Their roommates would hang out sometimes too. I now hated being in my own room. Being in the same room with Weston made me sick. One night, Dylan asked, "Why don't you sleep in your own room?" Just. Weston's a bit weird, I said. Everyone's weird at this school, Brandon said, laughing. No, seriously weird. He talks at night, he has a weird notebook, the way he looks at me. Maybe he has a crush on you, Dylan said, teasing. But I didn't laugh. Something inside me felt the seriousness of this situation. Then that night came. I don't think about this incident much anymore because when I do, my stomach turns and my hands start shaking. But I need to tell it because this was the climax of everything. I woke up around midnight. It was pitch black outside, even the street lamp wasn't on, probably the power had gone out due to a storm. Lightning from the window occasionally illuminated the room. At first I didn't understand why I'd woken up. Maybe noise. Maybe a nightmare. But then I realized there was a strange feeling in the room. Like the air had thickened, breathing was harder. As I tried to adjust my eyes to the darkness, lightning struck. In that 1 second of light, I saw him. Weston. Standing at the foot of my bed. Looking at me. Smiling. I screamed. I couldn't help myself. With that sudden fear, I sat up in bed and just yelled at him. But he didn't even flinch. His smile didn't change. His hands were slightly raised in the air, as if he was about to reach for me but had frozen at the last moment. His eyes were so bright. Even in the darkness, they seemed to glow as if there was a light inside them. "What are you doing?" I yelled. My voice was shaking. There was a long silence. Then, in that flat, emotionless voice, he spoke. "You were talking in your sleep." "What?" "You were talking in your sleep," he repeated. "I was trying to wake you up. By standing over my bed." He paused, as if he hadn't expected this question at all. Then slowly, as if he were a robot, he said, "I'm sorry. Did I scare you?" "Scare me? Could anything be more terrifying than this kid?" "Go to your bed," I said. I tried to establish authority in my voice but failed, I just sounded like a scared child. Weston tilted his head, that smile still on his face, and slowly walked to his bed. He lay down, pulled up the blanket, and immediately went to sleep as if nothing had happened. Calm, regular breaths. But I spent that night awake. I sat in bed, leaned my back against the wall, and watched Weston's every move. If he got up again, I was ready to run. When morning came, sunlight filtered through the window and everything looked normal. Weston woke up, yawned, and said, "Good morning," to me, as if nothing had happened last night. At breakfast, I brought this up to him. I pulled him to a corner of the cafeteria and said, "What the hell were you doing last night?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You were standing over my bed." "Me?" He looked genuinely confused. "Tyler, I didn't do that." "You did. I saw you." "Maybe you had a nightmare," he said, shrugging. "I slept all night." "You're lying." "You." "Tyler," he said, with a sharpness in his voice for the first time. "I didn't do it." And then he left. He left me there, confused and angry. Either he was a really good liar, or he genuinely didn't remember. I don't know which is worse. The next few days passed quietly, but the atmosphere had become tense. Weston talked to me normally, but occasionally I'd catch his smile. That smile. As if he knew a secret. And then the snake incident happened. It was Saturday afternoon. I'd returned from the gym, soaked in sweat and just wanting to shower. I opened the door to the room and there was a snake on my bed. A small snake, maybe 30 to 40 centimeters long, but still a snake. It was coiled on my bedspread, its small head raised, looking at me. I screamed. Again. I really hate screaming, but what was I supposed to do? Weston was at his desk, sitting calmly, studying. When he heard me yell, he turned around. "Oh," he said, as if I'd found a lizard in my bed. "It must have escaped." "What do you mean escaped?" "I'm sorry," he said, but there was no apologetic tone. "It was just a little prank. I didn't think it would scare you." I pointed at the snake. "Where did you find this?" "What do you mean, where did I find it?" He looked genuinely confused. "They're everywhere." "They're, what?" "Snakes. Everywhere. In the woods. Under the buildings. They're around us constantly." Our eyes locked. And at that moment, I understood that Weston was speaking seriously. He wasn't joking. He really thought snakes worked everywhere. "Tyler," he said slowly, "they're harmless. Look." He took a jar from his desk. It was an old Skippy peanut butter jar. He opened the lid and walked toward the snake. And then, the snake went in. It just slithered into the jar on its own, as if it were going home. Weston closed the lid, lifted the jar, and showed it to me. "See? They're my friends." Such a terrible feeling formed inside me. This kid wasn't just weird, there was something else. Something much deeper. That week, I thought about reporting the situation to my RA, resident advisor, dorm supervisor. But what would I say? My roommate is showing me lists of names, talking to walls at night, and acting like he collects snakes. I knew it would sound ridiculous. But things got even worse. One night, I don't remember exactly which day, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, I experienced something strange. I was asleep. Or at least I thought I was. Because suddenly, I felt my bed shaking. I couldn't open my eyes. My body was numb, like I was experiencing sleep paralysis. But my bed was shaking, as if someone was pushing it. Then I saw a silhouette at the foot of my bed. It was dark, just a shadow. But it was there. Looking at me. And then, something terrible happened. The silhouette leaned toward my bed. It reached out its hand, or something resembling a hand, and grabbed the mattress. It shook the bed, harder this time. I tried to scream inside but no sound came out. Then the silhouette started shaking. As if it had become angry. It was swaying violently from side to side and things in the room started falling. Books from my desk. Clothes from the closet. Everything was flying around. And then the silhouette lunged toward the window. The glass shattered. With a loud crash, the window broke and the silhouette flew outside. And at that moment my eyes snapped open. My breath was cut off. I was choking. The room was really messy, books on the floor, clothes everywhere. And the window had really shattered. Shards of glass were falling to the floor in real time, as if it had just been broken moments ago. This wasn't a nightmare. It couldn't be. I looked at the edge of my bed. There were long, deep scratches in the wooden frame. As if an animal had clawed and scraped it. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I ran to Weston's bed. He was still asleep, or pretending to be. He was even snoring. I started shaking him. Weston. Wake up. I kept shaking, knowing he was faking it, but he didn't wake up. I kept shaking him and the longer he stayed asleep, the more desperately I wished he would wake up. It was such a nasty feeling. I was both deathly terrified of him and deathly terrified of what it would mean if he hadn't been behind the whole thing. If my nightmare hadn't been a nightmare. The moment I started thinking about that possibility, I started shaking. I wanted to be able to blame him for what had happened, or at least have another person to make me feel less lonely and afraid. But he didn't wake up. It was too much for me to handle. I went back to my bed, curled up in a ball, and started crying. I didn't know what else to do. The broken window was real. The ransacked room was real. The scratches in the bed frame were real. I was 13 years old. 200 miles from home. My roommate was clearly a psychopath. And, something was in my room. Something was following me. A few minutes later, Weston finally woke up. He stretched, yawned, and seemed genuinely shocked at the state of the room. "What happened?" he said. "You happened." I yelled. "You went through my stuff." "Me?" He jumped out of bed. "Tyler, I was asleep." "You're lying." "You were going through my stuff," he yelled. "You found my notebook, didn't you?" I froze. How did he know? "You read it," he continued, his voice getting louder. "I told you not to touch it." "What is that notebook, Weston? Why is my name in there?" He stopped. His face reddened, his eyes trembled. And then, he made a strange sound. He started hissing. "Yes, you heard right, like a cat. SSSSSS." And then he started yelling. But not in English. In a language I didn't recognize. The words were harsh, sharp, and frightening. His hands were waving in the air, as if he were casting a spell. I yelled back at him. I don't even know what I said, I was just yelling from fear and anger. Then the door opened. Our RA Kevin burst in. "Hey! Hey! Calm down." Kevin separated us. Weston was still yelling in that strange language, his eyes had gone wild. Kevin took me out into the hallway. "Tyler, you're going to stay in a different room tonight," he said. That night, I was placed in an empty guest room. The room was cold and felt abandoned. I lay on the bed but couldn't sleep. Every sound startled me. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Around 4 a.m., I finally started to drift off to sleep. But right then, I felt a cold breeze. I opened my eyes. The window was open. But I had definitely closed it. Definitely. I jumped out of bed, closed the window, and locked it. Then I dragged the chair and placed it in front of the door. And for the rest of that night, I kept the lights on. The next morning, Kevin called me to his office. The assistant principal, Mr. Phillips, was there too. "Tyler," said Mr. Phillips, "we need to talk about what happened last night." I told them everything. The notebook, the snake, the nighttime visits, the broken window. Everything. Mr. Phillips took notes, nodded, and said, "I see." But I could tell from his tone that he didn't really believe me. "Weston is going through a difficult time," Kevin said. "There are family issues. Maybe you and he just don't mesh." "Don't mesh?" I said. The guy stood over my bed. "Weston says he's a sleepwalker," Mr. Phillips said. "That's not uncommon." "What about the notebook? What about the names?" "Which notebook?" said Mr. Phillips. I stopped. "His black notebook. He keeps it under his bed." Mr. Phillips and Kevin looked at each other. "Tyler," Mr. Phillips said slowly, "we checked Weston's room this morning. There was no such notebook." My heart dropped. "What?" "No, it's there. I saw it." "Maybe he took it," Kevin said gently. "Or maybe you're under a lot of stress. Boarding school isn't easy for everyone." They didn't believe me. I looked like a crazy kid. "Listen," said Mr. Phillips, "we're moving you to a different room. A fresh start." "Okay." I nodded. What could I say? That afternoon, as I was moving my things to my new room, I went back to the old room. Weston wasn't there. His things weren't there either. Everything had been completely cleaned out. As if he'd never been there. I asked a student in the hallway. "Have you seen Weston?" "Weston? Who's that?" "My roommate. Weston Aldrich." He shrugged. "Don't know him." I asked someone else. Same answer. Then I found Brandon. "Brandon, do you remember Weston?" "Weston?" He thought. "No, I don't remember anyone by that name." "Brandon, are you serious?" "We sat at the same lunch table with him." "Tyler, I never ate lunch with anyone named Weston." Something inside me broke. Either everyone was lying to me, or something else was happening. Something much worse. I went to the library and tried to research school records. But there was no student named Weston Aldrich. There never had been. That night, in my new room, my roommate Eric was a pretty normal and boring kid. I can't tell you how happy I was. As I lay in bed, I thought. Was Weston real? Or had I gone crazy? But no. The broken window was real. The scratches were real. The snake was real. Whatever happened, it was real. I don't want to talk about the rest of my time at that school because I don't remember it very clearly. It's like my brain erased my memory as a last resort or some kind of coping mechanism. I remember the days but not the details. I remember faces but not names. I only know one thing, I never saw Weston again. Not on campus, not in town, not anywhere else. And the scariest part? A few months later, I heard that Michael Thompson's body was found in a forest in Pennsylvania. He'd been missing for 2 months. The police said suicide. But it didn't seem right. Sarah Chen. She died a year later. An unknown illness. David Rodriguez. Car accident. Christopher Walsh. He never left the hospital. And the other crossed-out names I remembered from the notebook, something happened to all of them too. My name wasn't crossed out. And I'm still here. Sometimes I wake up late at night and look at my window. And I ask myself, is Weston still out there? In the woods? Does he still keep that notebook? And most importantly, will he cross out my name one day? My grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania was heaven when I was a kid, at least that's what I thought. 40 acres of land, mostly covered in woods. It was actually more forest than farm, but nobody minded that. The house was a historic structure, from the late 1800s, a huge farmhouse, with a gabled door, a big front porch, and miles of trees stretching out back. Every summer, my family would send me to my grandmother for 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks of July were mine, and the last 2 weeks of August were my cousin Francisco's. Our family had organized it this way to give my grandmother a break. I guess they thought throwing 2 kids on her at the same time would be exhausting. The house was 3 stories, but the 3rd floor was actually an attic. There was one finished room up there. It used to be my dad's room when he was my age. That's where I stayed. The room was quite strange. The ceiling sloped down on both sides because it was under the roof. There was only one window, and it looked out to the backyard, meaning the woods. The room had an old bed, a small desk, and pale blue wallpaper. The wallpaper had small flower patterns on it, but it was so faded it was almost ghostly. My grandmother and grandfather went to bed early. Usually before 9. My mom had said it would be rude to stay up after them, so I'd retreat to my room after saying goodnight to them. But I wouldn't sleep. I'd read books with a flashlight or play my Game Boy. There wasn't much else to do there anyway, no TV, no internet, my phone couldn't even find a signal sometimes. The first summer passed without incident. But the second summer, things started getting weird. The first night, everything was normal. My grandmother said goodnight to me, kissed me, and said, "I hope you have sweet dreams." Grandfather poked his head in too, said, "Don't keep the lights on too late," and smiled. I climbed the stairs, entered my room, and closed the door. I looked outside, moonlight glimmered through the forest trees. It looked very peaceful. I lay on the bed and turned on my Game Boy. I was playing Pokemon, very classic I know, but I loved it. An hour later, I heard footsteps. Footsteps on the wooden stairs leading up to the attic. Slow, measured steps. Someone was coming up. "Grandma?" I said. No answer. But the steps continued. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, as if someone were opening it very carefully, the door opened a few inches. Through the crack I could see a dark hallway, but I couldn't see anyone. I panicked. I turned off my flashlight and immediately pretended to be asleep. I closed my eyes tightly and slowed my breathing. I don't know why I did that. Maybe instinctive. Maybe I was embarrassed to see my grandmother because I still wasn't asleep. But I didn't hear any sounds. No footsteps, no door closing. Just silence. I stayed like that for about 5 minutes. Then I opened one eye. It was dark but the door was still ajar. And eventually I fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, the door was closed. The next morning, I told my grandfather about this. "Someone came to my room last night," I said. "Is that so?" he said, eating his breakfast. "Who?" "I don't know. I heard footsteps and the door opened." Grandfather laughed. "Ah, this old house. It makes all kinds of noises. When the wind blows, the wood creaks. Sometimes raccoons get into the walls." But the doorknob turned. "Wind," he said, nodding his head. "Or maybe a bat. There are bats in the attic." This didn't comfort me, but I didn't talk about it anymore. 3 nights later, something else happened. I was asleep, or so I thought. But I suddenly woke up because my bed was shaking. I opened my eyes. The only light in the room was moonlight filtering through the window. And someone was standing at the foot of my bed. A silhouette. A dark shadow. Motionless. It was looking at me. I knew it. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it. My heart started beating wildly. I wanted to open my mouth, wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The silhouette just stood there. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just was there. I closed my eyes. I started counting numbers in my mind. 1, 2, 3, up to 100. I tried to breathe. Tried to stay calm. When I reached 100, I opened my eyes. The shadow was gone. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and searched everywhere. There was nothing. When morning came, I noticed the closet door was open. But it had been closed the night before. I'm sure. I remember closing it. From that moment on, something happened every night. Not always the same thing, but similar. Some nights, I heard footsteps. On the attic stairs, slow and deliberate steps. Some nights, the door opened. Just a few inches, but it still opened. Some nights I woke up and that silhouette was at the foot of my bed. It always stood in the same position, as if watching me. And worst of all, some nights, I felt the edge of my bed sink. As if someone was sitting down. But every time, I closed my eyes. I pretended to be asleep. I didn't move. And eventually, whatever it was, it left. When the 2 weeks were up, I was so happy to go home. When my mom came to pick me up, I was practically jumping into the car. How was it? My mom asked. It was good, I said. But inside I was screaming, it was terrible, I never want to go back. On the way, I told her everything. The footsteps, the opening door, the silhouette, the bed sinking. My mom laughed. She really laughed. Sweetie, she said, your grandfather and grandmother's house is old. Of course it's going to make noises. And you have a very vivid imagination. But Grandma doesn't get up after she goes to sleep, my mom said. She had knee surgery, remember? She has trouble even going to the bathroom at night. She's not going to climb 3 flights of stairs to check on you. But Francisco never complained, my mom said. He stays in the same room and hasn't had any problems. Maybe you just missed home. This made me feel even worse. Maybe I really was imagining things. Maybe I was just looking for reasons to be scared. The 3rd summer came. I was 13, almost 14. I should have been more mature, less scared. But I wasn't. The first night, it all started again. Footsteps. The door opening. The silhouette. This time I noticed a detail, the silhouette wasn't just standing still, it was getting closer. A little closer each night. The first night, it was at the foot of the bed. The 3rd night, it was beside the bed. The 5th night, it was so close I could feel its breath. Or I thought I felt it. Cold, stale air. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't move. I prayed inside that it would leave. And every time, after a long silence, it left. On the 7th night, something changed. When I woke up, my bed was shaking. But this time the shaking was violent. As if someone had grabbed the bed with both hands and was shaking it. I couldn't open my eyes. Fear had paralyzed me. But I could feel it. The edge of the bed sank. Someone had sat down. The weight was there, it was real. And then, something touched my face. Fingers. Cold, rough fingers. They were tracing around my face. Starting from my forehead, eyebrows, cheeks, chin. As if mapping me. I wanted to scream but no sound came from my mouth. I wanted to move but I couldn't. Then the fingers stopped. For a while nothing happened. Then they grabbed my hand. They grasped my wrists and lifted them up. I couldn't let go. The fingers were so tight, they almost hurt. And they held them there. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I don't know. Then they let go. I heard footsteps. Moving away. The door opened and closed. I opened my eyes. The room was empty. I looked at my hand. There were red marks on my wrists. As if someone had really gripped them. That night, I slept inside the closet. I closed the door and curled up inside. I cried until morning. The next morning, I told my grandmother everything. "Grandma," I said, "there's someone in my room. They come at night." Grandma stopped. She put down her coffee and looked at me. "What did you say?" "Someone comes to my room," I said. "They touch me. Last night they held my hand." Grandma's face went white. She looked at Grandpa. "Tyler," Grandma said slowly, "have you ever felt uncomfortable in that room? When you first came?" "The second year," I said. "It wasn't there the first year." Grandpa's brows furrowed. "Maybe he's having bad dreams." "No," I said. "It's real. Look." I showed them my wrists. Grandma examined my wrists. The marks were still there. Faint but visible. "Maybe you scratched yourself in your sleep," Grandma said, but her voice was shaking. That day, Grandma and Grandpa were very quiet. They were whispering to each other, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. That night, I decided to go to bed early. I thought if I slept, maybe that thing wouldn't come. It was a foolish hope, but I had no other ideas. I went to bed at 9. I turned off the light and pulled the blanket over my head. I was trying to sleep, but every sound startled me. Then I heard the footsteps. But this time they were different. Heavier. More deliberate. The door opened. Completely opened, not just a crack. Someone entered. I had my eyes tightly closed, but I could hear breathing. Deep, rasping breaths. They approached the bed. This time they didn't stop at all. They came right to me. And then, they pulled the blanket. They pulled it off me and threw it aside. I couldn't freeze from fear anymore. I opened my eyes and screamed. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. I was the only one in the room. The blanket was on the floor, by the edge of the bed. As if someone had really pulled it. Crying, I went down the stairs. "Grandma. Grandpa." I woke them up. I told them everything. Grandma hugged me. "Okay," she said. "You're staying downstairs tonight." I slept in their guest room. It was on the first floor, comfortable and bright. I was safe. Or so I thought. Around 3 a.m., I woke up from the cold. I looked around in surprise. The window was open. Completely open. But I hadn't opened that window. It was closed the night before. I jumped out of bed and closed the window. My hands were shaking. I tried to lock it, but it was an old window, the lock wouldn't hold. I couldn't sleep. I sat up until morning, watching the window. The next day, My mom came to pick me up early. Grandma must have called her. We sat silently in the car. Mom didn't ask anything, and I didn't tell. But when we got home, Mom said, "You don't have to go there again." Really? Really? And I never went. Never again. Years passed. My grandparents died, first Grandpa, 2 weeks later Grandma. I believe she left with a broken heart. The funeral was very sad. Almost everyone in the family was there. At one point, I ran into Francisco. We were college age by then. We didn't talk much because we didn't have much in common. But at one point, I gathered courage and asked, "Francisco, when you went to the farm, did you ever experience anything strange?" He stopped. He looked at me. His face was expressionless. "What do you mean?" "The room in the attic." Did anyone ever come to your room?" Francisco was silent for a long time. Then, very slowly, he nodded his head. "They did." My heart stopped. "You too?" "Every night," he said. "The same thing." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "I did," Francisco said. His voice was empty. "I told my mom. Several times. She didn't believe me. She even got angry. 'Why are you making up such things?' she said. So I decided to keep quiet." Francisco. I swallowed. "What did it do to you?" Francisco looked at me. There was fear in his eyes, old, buried fear. "It touched me," he said. "It stroked my face. I could feel the fingers. Rough, cold fingers. Sometimes, it held my hand. Grabbed my wrists. And sometimes." He stopped. "What?" "Sometimes it smelled my hair," he said. It would lean its face over mine and smell my hair. My stomach turned. "Did you ever open your eyes?" I asked. "Once," Francisco said. "Only once." "But. What did you see?" Francisco shook his head. "I can't describe it. But I don't want to see it anymore." And then Francisco left. We didn't talk anymore. I'm 34 now. I'm married, I have 2 kids. I have my own house. And when choosing that house, I was very careful. I specifically looked for one thing: no attic. Our house has 2 floors, but no attic. No climbing to any room on the 3rd floor. No dark corners. I'd never leave my children alone in an old house either. Never. Because some places aren't safe. And some things can't be explained. I never found out what Francisco saw. And I don't want to know. Because I know too, there's something in that room. It was there years ago and it's probably still there. Waiting. For the next guest. When I was 9 years old, my family lived in the northern part of Philadelphia, in a neighborhood of row houses pressed tightly together. Our house was a 3-story townhouse squeezed between 2 identical-looking houses on either side. It was a very narrow house, each floor was maybe only 15 feet wide at most. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor, and my window looked directly into the house behind ours. The houses were so close that there was maybe 20 feet between them, at most. When I looked at the opposite window, I could see the room there clearly. At first, there was never anyone at that window. Months passed and I'd occasionally look across, sometimes from boredom, sometimes just from curiosity. But the window was always empty. Occasionally a light would come on, but I never saw anyone. Until one day I did. It was late March, school hadn't ended yet. I was doing my homework, math workbook, my most hated subject, when I lifted my head to look out the window. Just to rest, to give my brain a break. And she was there. A girl. She looked about my age, maybe a little older. Her dark brown hair was in a ponytail. And she was wearing a yellow sweater, a bright, sunflower yellow sweater. When she saw me, she smiled. And waved. At first I froze. But then I waved back. The girl smiled wider. Then she stepped back from the window, out of my view. Strange, I thought. But I didn't really care. Maybe she was a child of a family living in the back house. The next day, when I came home from school, I'd come home at 3:30 every day. I went up to my room. I threw my bag down, sat by the window. And the girl was there. Again. At the same window, in the same yellow sweater, with the same smile. When she saw me, she immediately waved. I waved too. This became a routine. Every day, when I came home from school, I'd look at the opposite window and she'd be there. Always at the same time, as if she were waiting for me. We started playing games. Silent games, because we couldn't hear each other. She'd show me drawings, she'd draw big shapes on a large piece of paper, hold it close to the glass. And I'd try to guess. A dog? A horse? A house? When I guessed, she'd nod in approval or rejection. Sometimes I'd show her my homework. Math problems, compositions I'd written. She'd give a thumbs up, good, or thumbs down, you can do better. On warm days, I'd open my window and think about calling out to her. But she never opened her window. She'd just smile, point to her ear, I can't hear you, she meant. As if she were trapped behind the glass. Maybe her family doesn't allow windows to be opened, I thought. Some parents were very strict. Or maybe she had allergies or something. One day, I asked my mom about the girl. Mom, who lives in the back house? Mom stopped washing dishes. The Murphys. An elderly couple. Why? Do they have grandchildren? Not that I know of. I think they don't have children. Why did you ask? Just. I saw a girl in their window. About my age. Mom frowned. Maybe a visiting niece or grandchild. Or maybe they took in a tenant. This made me a little sad. If the girl was just a visitor, she'd disappear one day. But weeks passed and she was always there. Every day, at 3:30, in her yellow sweater. It was mid-May. The weather had warmed up and I was sitting by my window reading a book. I looked at the opposite window, the girl was there, as always. This time she showed me a new drawing, a big sun with flowers around it. I smiled and gave a thumbs up. She nodded. Then something strange happened. The girl suddenly stopped. Her smile disappeared. Her face became serious and she pointed down, inside her own room, to a place I couldn't see. Then she clasped her hands together, as if begging. Her lips moved but I couldn't hear her. I was confused. What did she want? What was happening? She pointed again, down. Then clasped her hands again. There was panic in her eyes. I was scared. This wasn't normal at all. What should I do? Should I call my mom? But I didn't. I froze. And then. I turned back to my bed out of fear and hid under the blanket. I know, it was stupid. But I was 9 years old and I didn't understand what was happening. A few minutes later, I heard tapping sounds. Coming from the window. Tap, tap, tap. I slowly poked my head out and looked. The girl was still there, but now she was hitting the glass with her hand. Her face was red, as if she'd been crying. Then she suddenly stopped. She pulled back and disappeared from the window. For 3 days, the girl didn't appear at the window. Every day at 3:30 I'd look, but the window was empty. Even the light wasn't on. As if that room had been abandoned. Maybe she left because I made her angry, I thought. Maybe she didn't want to play with me anymore because I'd ignored her request for help. But on the 4th night, something happened. I was asleep. In a deep sleep. And then I suddenly woke up. Tapping. 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 It was coming from the window. I opened my eyes. There was dim light in the room, from the street lamp. I looked at the window. The girl was there. But this time it was different. She had both hands pressed against the glass. Her face was close to the glass, so close that her breath was fogging it up. And her mouth was moving. She was saying something. Over and over, the same words. Help me. I was learning through reading, I couldn't lip read, but I almost heard it. Help me. Please. Help me. I jumped out of bed. I ran to the window. That's when I noticed, there was a stain on her yellow sweater. A dark, blurry stain. Like paint. Or mud. Or blood. No. No, this wasn't possible. This was just a girl. A neighbor girl. But that stain, the stain was big. It was on her chest, spread out. The girl pulled back. Then she raised her hand, hit the window again. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she turned around, as if someone was calling her. And then, she ran into the darkness. Left the room. Disappeared from view. I was frozen. My heart was beating wildly. My hands were shaking. Mom! I yelled. Mom. I opened my bedroom door, rushed into the hallway. Mom. Dad. My mom and dad woke up and came into the hallway. What happened? Said Mom, her eyes swollen from sleep. The girl in the house across. She needs help. What? Said Dad. Which girl? The girl in the window. Something happened to her. Dad ran to my room. He looked out the window. There's nobody there, Tyler. But there was. She was wearing a yellow sweater and... Tyler, there's not even a light on. There's nobody in the room. But... It was just a nightmare, Mom said soothingly. Come on, let me put you back to bed. It wasn't a nightmare. I saw her. But they didn't believe me. They took me to bed, hugged me, and said, everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. The next morning, I saw Mrs. Murphy in the Murphy's backyard. She was working in her garden, watering her flowers. She was an old, sweet-looking woman, she had white hair, was always cheerful. I gathered my courage and went to the back fence of our yard. Hello, Mrs. Murphy. She turned and smiled. Oh, hello, sweetheart. You're Tyler, aren't you? Yes. I said. Mrs. Murphy, is there a girl staying at your house? The smile on her face slowly faded. She put down her watering can and came a little closer to the fence. Which girl? She said, her voice serious. The girl on the 3rd floor. She wears a yellow sweater. I waved to her every day from my window. Mrs. Murphy's face went white. Really white, as if all the blood had drained from her face. How long have you been seeing her? She asked. For a few weeks. Why? What is she like? She asked. Tell me. Dark hair. Ponytail. Yellow sweater. She never opens her window. Tears welled up in Mrs. Murphy's eyes. She put her hand to her mouth. Mrs. Murphy. Are you okay? Go home, Tyler, she said slowly. Go now. But. G.O., she yelled. I was shocked. Mrs. Murphy was never someone who yelled. I ran home. I was scared. Was I in trouble for what I said? That afternoon, my mom was on the phone. I could hear her voice, it was low but tense. I knew she was talking to Mrs. Murphy. She hung up, called me to the living room. Tyler, sit down, she said. Her voice was serious. I sat. Dad was there too, his arms crossed over his chest. Mrs. Murphy called me, Mom said. What did you tell her? Just. I asked about the girl in the window. What girl, Tyler, said Dad. The one on the third floor. The one wearing the yellow sweater. I waved to her every day. Mom and Dad looked at each other. Tyler, Mom said, there's nobody at that window. Mrs. Murphy and Mr. Murphy don't use that room. Haven't for years. But. You're not going to look at that window anymore, Dad said. Understand? Why? Because we said so, Mom said. That's enough. You're not going to look at that window anymore. Okay. I nodded, but I was eating myself up inside. Why didn't anyone believe me? That night, they moved my bed to the other side of the room. It now faced away from the window, toward the wall. They also hung thick curtains on the window. Such thick and heavy curtains that they blocked all the light. It'll help you sleep better, Mom said. But I knew. They wanted to keep me away from the window. The following days passed quietly. I went to school, came home, did my homework. But I didn't look at the windows. I didn't open the curtains. Until one night. It was midweek, maybe Wednesday. I woke up around midnight. The room was dark, the curtains were closed. But. I heard a sound. Tapping. 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 Coming from the window. My heart raced. No. No, this couldn't be. Tapping, tapping, tapping. I got out of bed. I walked toward the curtain. My hand was shaking. I slowly opened the curtain. Just an inch, just a little. And I saw her. At the opposite window. In her yellow sweater. She was hitting the glass. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth was open. As if she was screaming but no sound was coming out. And the stain had grown bigger. It covered almost her entire sweater. I pulled the curtain back. I returned to my bed. I covered my ears. Tapping, tapping, tapping. I didn't sleep until morning. A few days later, Mom picked me up from school early. We're moving, she said. What? Why? Dad got a job offer. In a different city. I knew she was lying. Dad had just started a new job only 6 months ago. Why would we move now? But I didn't say anything. I wanted to move. I wanted to get away from that house, from that window. A month later, we moved. To the suburbs in Pennsylvania, about an hour from Philadelphia. The new house was nice, single story, a large backyard. And most importantly, no other house was near us. No window looked at another window. Our life returned to normal. I made new friends at school, got used to a new routine. I tried to forget the girl in the window. But I couldn't forget. During my high school years, one day I gathered my courage and asked my mom. Mom, was the girl in the window real? She looked at me silently. There was a long silence. Then she took a deep breath. Mrs. Murphy told me something, she said. Before we moved, another family lived in that house. 2 parents and they had a daughter. Her name was Jenna. My heart raced. What happened to her? She was 11 years old. She was coming home from school. And, she was hit by a car. Right in front of the house. It happened right after school, around 3:30 in the afternoon. My breath caught. 3:30. And she was wearing a yellow sweater, Mom said. That sweater was her favorite. She wore it every day. My eyes filled with tears. Mom. The family was devastated. They locked their daughter's room. A few months later they sold the house. When the Murphys bought the house, they tried to use that room, but, strange things happened. Like what? I don't know exactly. Mrs. Murphy didn't give details. She just said it was restless. So they completely closed off the room. Nobody goes up there anymore. I sat quietly. Everything made sense. The yellow sweater. 3:30, the call for help. Mom, she saw me, didn't she? Mom nodded. Mrs. Murphy is a very spiritual woman. She knows a lot about spirits. She told me that, children can sometimes see. Adults can't, but children can. I'm 34 now. I'm married and I have my own children. We have a beautiful house, lots of glass, plenty of sunlight, and no other houses around us. But sometimes at night, before I go to sleep, I check the windows. Just to be sure. To make sure there's nobody across from us. Because I still see her. In my dreams. With her yellow sweater, her hands hitting the glass, her cry for help frozen on her lips. And that stain on her chest, it never went away. Sometimes, I think I really should have helped her. Maybe I shouldn't have looked away from the curtain. Maybe I should have done something. But what could I have done? I was a 9-year-old child. Still. I still ask myself, is Jenna still there? Is she still waiting at that window? And will another child wave to her one day? I hope they won't. I hope they don't see her. Because once you see her, she never leaves you.